Something was moving in the fog below the catwalk. It was keeping pace with the tower, even though the tower wasn't moving at all. That was the first thing my mind just flat out refused to accept. The second thing was the voice. It came up through the dark, steady and unhurried, like it had climbed the steel braces hand over hand. It just said, "Open up." I had the radio in one hand and the deadbolt in the other. Then the voice came again, closer somehow. It told me I left it down there. Suddenly, the trapdoor right in the middle of the cabin gave one hard thump from below. It wasn't a fist, but a deliberate, heavy blow. There are things I'm going to tell you tonight that I should have told a long time ago. I know what it sounds like when a guy waits years to start talking. But some stories don't get easier with age. They settle deeper, and they root. This all happened on the western side of Olympic National Park back in the fall of 2003. Say, shivering memory. It was late October, the kind of cold that just climbs inside your clothes and sits there. I was 38, working seasonal fire watch. The tower sat on a ridge above the Ho watershed. On a clear day, you could see forever, in layers of dark green timber. But that country makes its own weather. Most days, the clouds came low and just stayed there. I was up there to watch for smoke, log the weather, and keep an eye on the backcountry. A grim reality. Hikers disappeared out there for ordinary reasons all the time. The whole world felt reduced to wet fir bark and the smell of kerosene. The tower had 4 windows, a bunk, and a trap door right in the middle of the floor. When the wind hit it, the whole thing gave off these small sounds. Ticking bolts, whining braces. It turned into the structure's breathing. Solitude didn't really bother me. What bothered me was how quickly the mountain erased scale. A raven flying close to the glass could look as big as a person. Sound carried wrong up there, leaving you with this heavy, creeping unease. 3 days before the knocking started, a hiker named Emily Voss failed to come out. She was in her mid-20s, solo, looking to photograph the moss under the canopy. I remember her bright yellow jacket and the reel film camera she carried. Thursday passed with no sign of her. By Friday afternoon, the fog rolled in so thick it swallowed the ridge whole. I sat by the radio, listening to the search teams start their sweep. The first sweep turned up absolutely nothing. No tent, no camera bag, and no sign of that bright yellow jacket. By dusk, all they had to go on was a single boot print pressed deep into the mud. The only other lead was a creepy report from a couple out of Port Angeles. They claimed they heard a woman calling out after dark near the river. But when they yelled back into the trees, they got absolutely nothing. Rain moved in hard that night and just didn't let up. By Saturday, they had to widen the search grid across the mountain. I stayed up in the box, logging coordinates while the radio kept fuzzing out in the static. Around noon, a volunteer named Mercer broke through the static with something weird. He'd wandered off the main trail and found this old, abandoned campsite. No gear, just a faded blue survey ribbon tied around a dripping branch. Mercer asked the radio if anyone knew who marked the area, but nobody had a clue. When he finally came back on, his voice sounded totally different. He whispered that he heard soft footsteps moving with him up the hill, exactly stopping when he stopped. Whatever was out there wasn't crashing through the brush like an animal. It was moving way too quiet for that. Then Mercer found a fresh print in the mud by a log, shaped like a hand but way too long to be human. The search leader immediately told Mercer to pull back to the main group. Mercer gave this strained, nervous laugh over the radio, trying to play it cool. When he finally made it back, he was pale as a ghost and wouldn't say another word. That evening, the search teams stood down, leaving me all alone up on the ridge. The heater was hissing and the rain just kept tapping against the glass. That's when I got my first real sign that something out there knew I was listening. Right after dark, I heard boots on the outside stairs. It wasn't the wind or the wood settling. It was the heavy, slow rhythm of someone climbing up. I grabbed my flashlight and crept toward the window, expecting to see a face in the rain. Eventually, that heavy feeling just lifted. Like a pressure valve releasing in the room. By morning, I was already making excuses for myself. Wind, stress, too much time alone in a glass box. Those excuses held up until Sunday afternoon, when a local volunteer named Halpern hiked up the ridge. He wasn't officially on the search team, but he knew the old timber routes. He showed up soaked through, and he looked angry. He stood by my heater with his hands out. Not to get warm, but to stop them from shaking. He asked if the missing girl had brown hair and a yellow jacket. I told him yes. He said he'd been down near the river at dawn and saw a woman's shape in the trees. The jacket was bright against all that wet green. But when he walked toward her, she stepped behind a massive cedar. She never came out the other side. When he checked the tree, there were no tracks. Just a fresh strip of black camera film, wet and curled, hanging from a low branch. Then he looked past me, staring at the fogged windows like the weather itself was listening. He told me the girl wasn't what sent him running up here. There was a man standing downhill from him. An older guy in a flat ranger hat. He just watched Halpern, then slowly backed into the trees, wanting to be followed. I asked why he didn't go after him. Halpern said, "Because he had my face." I could tell he was ashamed of being that scared. Before he left, he stopped at the door. He told me if I hear someone outside after dark, don't let them make me curious. That night, curiosity wasn't my problem. Just after 1 in the morning, the radio exploded with static. It was so loud, it yanked me right out of my bunk. I hit the set and called for a repeat. Then a woman's voice came through, weak and breathless. It was Emily. She said, "I'm on the stairs. Please don't lock me out." At the exact same time, I heard footsteps. Soft, measured steps, starting to climb. But they weren't outside on the stairs. They were inside the tower. Something was coming up the inner maintenance ladder. I called down through the floorboards without opening the hatch. I asked for her name, asked where she was hurt. I asked her to tell me something only the station staff would know. The voice on the radio just started crying. Small, wet breaths, like someone freezing to death. Then, right through the wood under my boots, a second voice spoke from the ladder well. It matched the radio perfectly. It just said, "Please." I backed away so fast I slammed into the desk. The radio and the voice below kept crying together for a few seconds. Then the radio cut to dead static. But the voice in the ladder well kept climbing. Step. Pause. Step. Pause. Until it stopped directly beneath the trapdoor. There was no way down except through that hatch. No reason to climb up there unless it knew I wouldn't open the door. The heavy wooden trapdoor lifted half an inch. The metal latch held tight. Then it settled back into place with a thud. I stood over that hatch with an emergency flare and a heavy tool. I listened so hard I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. Minutes passed. Maybe an hour. No retreating steps. No impact. Just absolute, suffocating silence. When dawn finally broke, I unlatched the hatch. There was nothing on the ladder. Nothing in the shaft.
The lower access was still locked from the inside.
But sitting right there on the top rung was Emily's camera. The protective bag was gone, and the body was soaking wet. When I popped the back open, it was empty.
The film had been violently ripped out in one long strip.
It was wound tightly around the ladder rail, trailing all the way down into the dark.
I radioed it in, and they sent a crew up by late morning.
I handed over the camera and showed them the access point.
But I didn't tell them about the matching voices. I knew how crazy it sounded.
A man can ruin his own credibility with just one sentence. Things got worse when we realized Halpern was missing too.
He never made it back to his truck after leaving the tower.
Search teams found his vehicle near a washout, and 20 feet away, his old canvas coat was hanging over a branch.
The sleeves were empty, like he'd just vanished mid-step. Late that afternoon, one of the younger rangers pulled me aside.
Her name was Ortega, and she had a look on her face like she was carrying something heavy. She told me there were old stories about the west side drainages that never made it into the official logs. Stories about lost people being heard long after the search teams moved on.
She said years back, a lookout keeper on another ridge walked outside in the middle of the night. He swore he heard his wife calling from the catwalk, even though she was miles away in Tacoma. They found him at the base of the tower the next day.
Ortega looked right at me and said she wasn't telling me this to scare me. She just didn't want me going outside. If it tried to sound reasonable.
The search for Emily officially ended 4 days later. Halpern's file stayed open, but winter was closing in fast, and the mountain was shutting us out.
I stayed in that tower because pride feels a lot like duty.
The worst of it happened during my final week up there.
The fog got so thick it completely erased the catwalk, pressing a whitening dark right up against the glass. No moon, no stars, just absolute isolation. Around midnight, I heard something moving below the tower. It was circling the structure, sounding like somebody dragging a heavy, wet rope through the brush. He kept stopping right beneath whichever window I turned away from.
It went on for over an hour.
And then a voice called up from the dark.
It wasn't Emily, and it wasn't Halpern.
It was me, my own voice, rising from below the catwalk, where nothing could possibly stand.
"You can stop now," it said.
I couldn't move a muscle. You know what happened to them. It was using my exact cadence, my own exhaustion thrown right back at me. Then it said, "You left the trail marker."
My mouth went completely dry.
Years ago, I'd left some blue survey ribbon out there and never cleaned it up. The thing below knew exactly how to use my guilt against me. The voice just kept talking softly in the fog. It told me she followed what I'd left. My mouth went dry as paper.
Maybe she really did find that old ribbon and wander off the trail. Or maybe the thing just knew how guilt opens a man faster than any key.
Then it said, "Open up, and I'll show you."
I looked up at the glass.
A shape was moving through the fog right outside the nearest pane. It was human height, just a head and shoulders. But it drifted past the glass way too smoothly for a person walking. It reached the door. I couldn't breathe. The handle turned once. Just a slow, polite pressure, like it was patiently waiting to be invited inside. Right after that came the thump from beneath the trapdoor. Above and below, at the exact same time, there was something at the door and something under the floor. And then, from somewhere out in the white dark, a woman began to scream, not continuously. It came in broken bursts,
Like each cry had to be dragged through water first. I should have run to the radio. I should have called it in. Instead, I just stood there with both hands over my ears, while my own voice kept murmuring right outside the door, telling me the screaming would stop if I just let it in. The screaming didn't stop. What stopped was me. Something inside me just gave way. I grabbed an emergency flare and struck it. I shoved the burning stick right against the gap around the trapdoor. Sparks and smoke filled the cabin. Then I fired a second flare out through the vent hatch. Red light poured into the fog. It painted the windows like blood under ice. The screaming cut off at once. So did the voice at the door. The handle settled. The trapdoor went completely still. For maybe 5 seconds, the whole mountain held its breath with me. Then something large moved away from the tower, crashing through brush that shouldn't have supported anything so heavy. The circling sound faded downslope into the trees. I left at first light, and I never spent another night in a lookout. At first light, I packed my gear and walked down those stairs for the last time. Officially, I transferred out because of exhaustion and nerves. Unofficially, I knew that ridge didn't want witnesses. It wanted participants. A whole year went by. Then, after the spring runoff, a search team found something tangled in the mud along the Ho River. It was a degraded strip of camera film. The film was too damaged to print cleanly. The lab techs wrote it off as motion smear, or a double exposure. But when I finally saw the contact sheet, my blood ran cold. One frame had survived just enough to show a blurred shape against the fog. It was the pale silhouette of the lookout tower, and standing on the catwalk outside the cabin door was a man in a uniform. Even blurred, I knew it was me. But I wasn't on that catwalk when the picture was taken. Emily had to be somewhere below the tower, looking up through the fog, while something wearing my shape stood above her. That was the last piece of the puzzle I ever got. No bodies were ever recovered. Just years of waking up when rain hits the windows, wondering if my guilt attracted it, or just taught it what voice to use. People ask why I waited so long to say any of this out loud. Part of me hoped that silence meant consent, and it might leave me alone. I wanted to believe it would stay trapped on that ridge. But parks change, and old towers come down. What lives in a place doesn't always die with the structure that hosted it. Sometimes it just loses one doorway and starts looking for another. A few winters ago, I was driving the Ho Road in a storm. I pulled over because my headlights caught something white moving in the trees. It was fresh camera film hanging from a cedar branch. And just beyond the reach of the lights, somebody in a ranger hat was standing perfectly still, with rain shining on his face, waiting for me to remember which one of us was still outside. I sat there behind the wheel, completely frozen. The thing wearing my face didn't even blink in the freezing rain. It just stared me down, letting the storm wash over it. That's when it hit me. It hadn't just stolen my voice. It had stolen my place out there in the dark. Slowly, it took a single step backward. It just melted right back into the shadows of the cedars. The only proof it was ever there was that black strip of film, just twisting in the wind. I slammed the car into gear and got the hell out of there. I didn't check my rearview mirror once. I drove for hours that night. My hands were gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles ached. Every shadow on the edge of the road looked like a man in a ranger hat, just waiting for me. The guilt I'd been carrying all those years
finally broke me.
My silence hadn't protected anyone.
Which brings us to tonight.
I'm sitting here now, finally putting this nightmare into words.
I know how it sounds, like some old guy rambling about ghosts in the woods.
But I honestly don't care anymore.
I'm telling you this because a secret is a dangerous thing to keep alone. Spread out on my desk are the only pieces of proof I have left. That blurry contact sheath.
An old map of the Hoh River Trance.
They're constant reminders of Emily. And of Halpern.
And of that thing.
The thing that learned how to use my voice to hunt.
Olympic National Park is massive. And it's beautiful.
But it's completely indifferent to the people who wander through it.
The trees don't care if you're lost.
The fog doesn't care if you're scared.
But there are pockets of that forest that are actively listening, just waiting for someone to make a mistake. They eventually tore down that old fire watchtower.
The wood was rotting out and it just cost too much to keep up. But destroying the building didn't destroy what lived underneath it. It just took away the only boundary keeping it contained.
Now it's free to roam.
Every year, new hikers head into the backcountry.
They're just chasing the quiet and the scenery.
They bring their cameras and their bright jackets,
completely unaware of the history buried in that mud. I watch the news every fall now, just waiting to hear about the next person who steps off the trail.
Somewhere out there in those dark woods,
a faded blue survey ribbon is still tied to a cedar branch.
It's a silent trap, left behind by my own stupid mistake. And somewhere nearby, a voice that sounds exactly like mine is calling out for help, begging you to come find it.
So if you ever find yourself hiking out there
and you hear someone calling your name from the fog,
do not answer. Do not step off the path to investigate.
Just keep walking and keep your head down.
And pray it decides you aren't worth the effort. You gotta hope that putting a nightmare into words is gonna drain the life out of it.
Like dragging something out of the dark will finally make it wither away.
But it doesn't work like that.
Honestly, talking about it just makes the edges sharper.
Every time a heavy rain rolls in and hits the glass, I'm right back in that glass box.
I can still hear that heavy, flat thump under the floorboards.
I stare at this blurry contact sheet until my eyes burn.
I look at that shape on the catwalk, and I can't help but wonder if it's still up there on that ridge.
Just standing in the mist,
waiting for the next season.
Wearing my face, wearing my uniform, and practicing my voice until it gets the cadence exactly right.
It's a predator that uses our own guilt and empathy as the bait.
Halpern figured it out, but he was too late to save himself.
Emily Voss just wanted to take some photos of the moss.
And she walked right into a trap I accidentally helped set.
I've carried that weight around for 20 years.
It ruined my sleep, it ruined my peace, and it kept me looking over my shoulder.
But now I've put it out there.
Now you know the truth about those woods.
Like I said at the beginning of all this, drop your town in the comments below.
Tell me where you're listening from. Men like me don't just tell these stories to hear ourselves talk. We do it for survival. Because some things out there in the deep country are a lot less dangerous once more than one person knows they exist. If we share the burden of the secret, maybe it loses its power in the dark. So if you're heading out to the peninsula this fall, stay safe. Stick to the official trails, carry a real map, and don't trust every voice you hear when the fog rolls in.
And whatever you do, if you see an old, faded blue ribbon tied to a branch off the main path, just keep walking.
Don't let it make you curious.
Good night, everybody.
A few winters ago, long after they tore that old lookout down, I was driving the Hoh Road.
It was a bad storm. Rain coming down in sheets, the kind that makes the wipers useless.
Just me and the headlights cutting through the dark.
The trees out there always feel like they're leaning in, watching you pass.
I was just trying to get home.
Then I saw something moving off in the trees near a trailhead.
Just a flash of white in the dark.
At first, I figured it was a sign, or maybe a shred of tarp caught in the wind. But something about the way it moved made me hit the brakes. I pulled over to the shoulder.
Let the headlights sweep across the brush. I sat there for a second, squinting through the rain,
telling myself to just put it in drive and keep going. But you know how it is.
You gotta know.
When the headlights finally steadied on it, my stomach just dropped. It wasn't a tarp or a sign. It was strips of camera film, hanging right there from a low cedar branch, fresh and black, just gently turning in the wind and the rain. Like it had just been pulled out of the canister.
All that time, I thought I'd left it behind on that ridge.
I really thought it was over. But it was right there, waiting for me. And then I saw him standing there, just beyond the reach of the headlights, hiding in the shadows, frozen, standing perfectly still in the dark, wearing a ranger hat with the rain shining on his face, my face, just waiting there patiently in the trees, waiting for me to remember which one of us was still outside.